She was warned. Every woman in that assembly room had been warned. He stood alone in the far corner of the hall, no name given, no pleasantries offered, no hand extended to any of the dance cards that circled the room like small white flags of surrender, and the whole of Bath whispered that the man in the dark coat was a storm one did not walk into willingly. Verity Merriweather walked in anyway. She did not know, when she crossed that crowded floor, that she was approaching a duke. She did not know that what she would find behind those walls of cold reserve was a secret that could destroy him, and a man who had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone exactly like her. This is the story of a dare taken lightly, and a truth discovered at great cost, of a man who wore silence like armor, and a woman who learned to read the cracks in it, of medicine and mystery, and the particular courage it takes to be fully known, without disguise, without pretense, without the shields we build to keep the world from seeing how close we are to breaking. Tell me where you are listening tonight, the city, the hour, what you are carrying into this particular evening. I read everyone. Bath, June of 1815. The assembly room smelled of hot wax and lavender water, and the particular desperation of the English upper classes, attempting gaiety in midsummer heat. The chandeliers overhead cast a trembling gold across the crowd, and the musicians at the far end were playing a country reel with more enthusiasm than accuracy, the violins bright and slightly sharp in the warm air. Verity Merriweather stood near the punch bowl with Miss Poppy Ingram, exactly where she always stood at assemblies, and they were both watching the man in the corner. He had arrived an hour earlier and hadn't moved. He was tall, not dramatically so, but with the particular presence of a man who occupied space as though he had been given the rights to it. A dark coat cut without ornament, dark hair combed back without artifice. One hand rested on the marble mantelpiece above a fireplace that hadn't been lit in weeks. His face was composed in a way Verity associated with effort, not with ease. His jaw was set too deliberately. His eyes, scanning the room from beneath level brows, were the deep still green of a forest pool in shadow. And they moved across the crowd, not with curiosity, but with assessment. He had given no name to the master of ceremonies. She had noticed that. "No one will approach him," Poppy said, her voice low and delighted beside Verity's ear. "They say he arrived this morning with no cards, no letters of introduction. He spoke only to Mr. Calloway, and that was merely to decline an introduction to Lady Bryce." "Lady Bryce," she touched Verity's arm. "I dare you to speak to him." "You dare me," Verity repeated. 5 shillings. It was a ridiculous sum. It was also not the point. The point, and Poppy knew this because she had known Verity since they were 12 and sharing Latin lessons in a drafty rectory, was that Verity had already been watching him for 20 minutes, and not because of any dare. She had been watching his hands. He wore gloves, black, perfectly fitted to his hand, without any of the ivory or cream-piping fashionable men used that season. Nothing unusual in that. But his left hand, resting against the mantelpiece, hadn't moved once in 20 minutes. Not to adjust his cravat, not to reach for a glass, not to gesture during the single brief exchange she had observed him conduct with a neighboring gentleman. His right hand had done all of it, lifted the cup, straightened the lapel, made the small, considered movements of a man managing his presence in a room. His left hand remained still, with the deliberate stillness of a limb a man has learned not to trust. Her father had a patient with an essential tremor. She had sat in on 11 of those consultations. Verity set down her punch glass. "Keep the shillings," she told Poppy, and walked across the room. He didn't look up when she approached. She had expected that. Men who cultivated distance rarely acknowledged arrival with enthusiasm. She stopped at a reasonable remove, not quite beside him, not quite in front of him, in the position she had learned from her father when examining a nervous patient, close enough to be heard, far enough not to threaten. "You have been standing in the same spot for an hour," she said, "and you have declined every introduction offered. I have come to admire the commitment." He looked at her then. His green eyes were very direct, and close up they were lighter than she had judged from across the room. Not quite the shadow of still water, more the particular shade of old moss in sunlight, with something watchful behind them. "Is this an introduction?" he said. His voice was low, a little rough, as though disuse had given it texture. "No," Verity said. An observation. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. Nothing so generous. More the subtle recalibration of a man expecting one thing and receiving another. Verity Merriweather, she said. My father is Dr. Emerson Merriweather. We are in Bath for the season, which is what people say when they mean they are in Bath because a physician cannot afford London and also cannot afford to be seen admitting it. He studied her for a moment. And do you always explain yourself so thoroughly to strangers? I explain myself clearly, she said. There is a difference. You have not offered your name. No, he said. I have not. She nodded, as though this were a perfectly satisfactory answer, the kind one filed away and returned to later. Your left hand, she said then quietly, not making a pronouncement of it, only offering a fact carefully, between two people still in the process of deciding what they were to each other. You have not used it once this evening. I do not say this to alarm you. I say it because I notice things, and because I thought it might be worth knowing that at least one person in this room has noticed, and that person is not inclined to mention it to anyone else. The silence that followed was long enough that she thought she had misjudged the entire proceeding. Then he said, You are a physician's assistant. I am a physician's daughter who was not discouraged from learning. It amounts to the same thing in practice. It does not, he said with a precision that was not unkind, amount to the same thing in law. No, she agreed, but the law does not attend consultations. He looked at her for a long time. The fireplace behind him was cold and unlit, and the smell of old ash reached her, mixing with his cologne, something with cedar in it and formality, the scent of a man who dressed for occasions he did not intend to enjoy. Around them the reel continued, and the crowd moved in its slow glittering wheel. No one looked at the corner where they stood. What do you observe? He said finally. Careful. Testing. A tremor, she said. Probably essential. Probably in the early stages, given the compensation you have developed. It has not yet affected your daily functions significantly. You would not be here in public if it had, but you are protecting it. You have been protecting it for some time. He said nothing. I am not going to tell anyone, she said. I have no reason to and considerable disinclination to involve myself in the business of people I have only just met. I merely thought, she glanced at his left hand, still resting quietly against the marble, that it is an exhausting thing to hold something still. She left him standing there, the only dignified exit available to her, and returned to Poppy, who was vibrating with curiosity. Verity told her nothing of consequence. She spent the rest of the assembly aware of the green eyes that tracked her once across the room, and then again, and then did not look away. The note arrived the following morning before Verity had finished her first cup of tea. It was addressed to Dr. Emerson Merriweather and came on heavy cream paper, the seal pressed in dark wax with the impression of a bird she did not recognize. A falcon, she thought, or something like one. Her father was in bed with the gout that had arrived 2 weeks prior and showed no signs of departing. He read the note twice, his eyebrows climbing with each pass, then handed it to Verity without a word. The writer required a physician. He was staying at Drummond Park, 7 miles north of Bath. He had been directed, the phrasing was precise, to seek out Dr. Merriweather specifically, by virtue of a recommendation from a colleague in Edinburgh. Compensation would be arranged. A carriage would be sent. There was no name, only the direction and the seal. You cannot travel 7 miles with the gout, Verity said. No, her father agreed. He looked at her over the edge of his spectacles in the particular manner he used when he was about to say something he had already decided and was only now informing her of. And you can. I am not a licensed physician. You have assisted at 14 consultations this month, diagnosed Mrs. Partridge's cardiac irregularity before I had finished taking her history, and yesterday morning you caught a dosage error in the dispensary that would have given Mr. Ford enough laudanum to last a fortnight longer than his constitution intended. He set the note on the coverlet between them. Drummond Park is expecting a physician. I am sending the next best available option. The carriage came at 9:30. It was large and very quiet, with dark panels and no livery she recognized, and the coachman handed her in without a word. The road north was lined with hedgerows heavy with June, elderflower and wild rose, and something green and sharp that she couldn't name. And the fields beyond them were pale gold in the morning light, cut through with the shadows of clouds moving fast. Verity had her father's medical bag across her knees and her hands folded on top of it. She was thinking about green eyes and a still left hand. Drummond Park appeared through a break in the trees, pale Regency stonework, long windows, a portico that conveyed authority without warmth. The housekeeper who met her was a spare woman named Mrs. Drake, who took her coat with the efficiency of someone whose day had already been thoroughly disrupted and who was managing it with precision. The patient, she said, would see Miss Merriweather presently. Presently turned out to be 15 minutes, which Verity spent in a sitting room that smelled of cedar and coal smoke and old books, looking at the portrait above the mantelpiece. A man in formal dress, standing with his shoulders back and his expression leveled at the painter, as though the painter had said something mildly disappointing. The nameplate on the frame read, Rafferty Drummond, 4th Duke of Drummond. He had the same jaw. He had the same eyes. He walked in 3 minutes later and he stopped when he saw her. She watched him arrive at the recognition in stages, the slight arrest of movement, his eyes adjusting from whatever expression they had carried through the door to a more carefully composed version of it, and she sat very still, because she thought sudden movement might make this worse. "Miss Merriweather," he said. "Your Grace," she said, because she knew now and there was no point in pretending otherwise. A long beat of silence. Then he walked to the chair across from her and sat in the precise, controlled way of a man who monitors his own movement, and he said, "My man in Edinburgh was meant to recommend your father. My father has the gout. He sent me." "I see." He looked at his hands for a moment, both of them resting on the arms of the chair. The black gloves were in place. "And you intend to examine me?" "I intend to try," Verity said. "You are, of course, free to decline. In which case, I will return to Bath and my father will write a very polite letter of apology for the inconvenience." "That is not what I want." "Then we are agreed." She opened the medical bag and set a small glass vial, a notebook, and her father's percussion hammer on the table between them. "I will need your left hand, Your Grace." He didn't move for a moment. The room was very quiet. The house settling in the June heat, a wood pigeon somewhere in the cedar trees, the distant sound of a door closing on an upper floor. Then Rafferty Drummond, 4th Duke of Drummond, removed the glove from his left hand and set it on the table beside the hammer. She examined him carefully, with the attention she brought to everything, and the particular stillness she had learned was more useful than speed. The tremor was there when she asked him to extend his arm, small, rhythmic, present at rest in the fingers, and slightly more pronounced when she asked him to reach for an object. She checked his reflexes, the coordination of his movements. She asked him to close his eyes and touch his nose, observed the quality of his speech, noted the steadiness of his gaze. "Essential tremor," she said, when she was done, in the same tone she would have used to read a weather report. "Not Parkinson's disease. The pattern is different and the prognosis is meaningfully better. It will likely progress, but slowly. Medication, primarily propranolol, though the dosage requires careful calibration, can reduce the severity significantly in many cases. It does not cure it. It makes it manageable." "I know," he said. "You have been seen before." "By one physician, in Edinburgh, who recommended your father." He looked at his uncovered hand resting on the arm of the chair. "I did not wish to be seen by my own London physicians. They know too many people." "You are keeping this from society." "I am keeping this from one person," he said. "My cousin, Cornelius Drummond. He is my nearest male heir, and has spent 3 years attempting to demonstrate to the courts that I am unfit to manage my estate. A physical condition affecting my left hand would be useful to him." Verity thought of the portrait in the sitting room, the leveled gaze, the precise set of the shoulders. "What is your cousin's argument?" she asked. "That I am reckless, erratic, unsuitable." A pause. "He has manufactured several incidents that support this reading of my character. He has allies in useful positions. He has also, in the last month, sent me 3 letters of a threatening nature. Anonymously, but I recognize the phrasing." She looked at him. He was looking at the window where the cedars moved against the pale sky. "You are frightened," she said. He turned to look at her. and the expression that crossed his face was not anger exactly, though it passed close to it. It was the face of a man unused to being read accurately and with no prepared response for the experience. "I am strategizing," he said. "You can do both." The silence stretched. Then, without announcement, something in his face loosened. Not much, not into softness, but into something less defended than it had been before. "I need you to stay," he said, "a fortnight, to monitor the medication response and establish a treatment plan. I will compensate your father adequately." He paused. "You will have your own rooms. Mrs. Drake will serve as chaperone. There is nothing—" He stopped, began again. "There is nothing irregular in this request." "There is everything irregular in this request," Verity said, "but I will consider it." She considered it for approximately 4 seconds. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." The first morning he did not come to breakfast. Mrs. Drake left a tray outside his study door and said nothing of it. Verity ate alone in the dining room and watched the garden through the long windows where deep red roses were opening in the heat against pale stone, and a cat she had not expected sat in the center of the flagged path, washing its face with the calm of something that had never in its life worried about propriety. The second morning he came to breakfast. They did not speak. They read. She had found an Edinburgh treatise on neurological conditions in the library and brought it to the table. He had a stack of correspondence. The silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of two people still calibrating each other, still taking the measure of what the other required. The third morning he said, "You were wrong about propranolol." "I am frequently wrong," she said. "About what specifically?" "The Edinburgh physician attempted it. The side effects were not manageable." She set down her fork. "What side effects?" "Fatigue. Some confusion." He lifted his coffee cup with his right hand steadily. "He suggested I discontinue." "He was wrong," she said. "The dosage was too high. The medication is correct. The calibration requires adjustment. I have been thinking about this." She had in fact been thinking about it since the second night, lying awake while the wind moved through the cedars and the house settled around her in its old patient way. "I would like to try a lower dose, introduced gradually, starting tomorrow if you agree." He looked at her across the table. The morning light came in from the east and caught the green of his eyes and made them look for a moment like something living and deep rather than guarded and contained. "You have been thinking about it," he said. "Yes." In the middle of the night. Sleep is inefficient when there is a problem. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but came from the same place as one would. He looked back at his correspondence. "Very well," he said. On the fourth day, the letter arrived. She was in the library when she heard Mrs. Drake's voice in the corridor, pitched low and urgent. She heard the rustle of an envelope. A long silence. Then she heard Rafferty say, in a voice stripped of every layer she had encountered in it until that moment, "Tell Breckenridge to increase the watch on the south gate." She sat in the library chair and didn't move until she heard him walk away. On the fifth day, she began the low-dose protocol and noted his response in the margins of her father's notebook. On the sixth day, he found her in the garden in the late afternoon, sitting on the stone bench beneath the rose arbor with a book she had not been reading. He sat on the opposite end of the bench, which was close but not improper. The roses smelled of warm sun and the beginning of decay, the particular sweetness of petals about to fall. "The medication," he said after a while. "I notice a difference." "The tremor itself will not change in a week," she said, "but the anxiety that accompanies it tends to." He was quiet for a moment. "You observe that too?" "I observe everything," she said. "It is irritating, I know. My father says the same." "It is not irritating," he said, in the tone of a man choosing his words with more care than the sentence seemed to require. They sat in the evening for a while longer, with the roses dropping their petals onto the warm stone between them, and the cat appearing at the edge of the arbor and observing them both with feline judgment before departing without comment. On the eighth day, she watched him write a letter at the desk in the study, the door open by 3 inches, because she had knocked, and he had not told her to come in, but had not told her to go away either. The quill was in his right hand, of course. His left lay still on the desk beside the inkwell, not hidden, not gloved, simply at rest in the way that a limb at rest can be, without apology or explanation. He wrote quickly, and his hand did not shake, and she thought about how much of what a person fears is not the thing itself, but the anticipation of it. The thing, when it arrives, is just a thing. The anticipation is a life spent in the corner with a cold fireplace at your back. She knocked more clearly. He looked up. "The 9th day," she said. "I would like to reduce the morning dose by a quarter and note the effect on the afternoon tremor separately, if you have no objection." He looked at her for a moment. "You are, I have come to understand, going to do this regardless of my objection." "I will note your objection carefully and proceed," she agreed. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close enough that she could see what amusement would look like on that face, if it were allowed to arrive. "Come in then," he said. On the 7th day, she found the letters. She had been given permission to use the library freely. She did not take this to extend to the locked drawer in the corner desk, but the key was not hidden with any care. It was beneath the inkwell, which was where her father kept the key to his medicine cabinet. And perhaps there was something universal about the human tendency to conceal keys under things one keeps in plain sight. She did not open the drawer that evening. She opened it 3 days later, when Rafferty came back from an appointment in Bath, looking as though he had received news that cost him something he had not budgeted for, and said only that Cornelius had been seen speaking to a magistrate's clerk, and then went upstairs without eating dinner. The drawer held correspondence. She did not read all of it. She read the 3 letters arranged on top, short, written in a hand affecting disguise, with the particular quality of someone intelligent trying to seem careless, and then she sat in the chair by the window, with the evening coming in soft and grey over the cedars, and she thought about what they said. They were not threats exactly, or not only. They were instructions. Cornelius Drummond had arranged for a London physician, a man with court connections and a history of providing testimony in competency hearings, to attend the midsummer gathering at Haverbrook House, a county affair where Rafferty was expected to appear. The plan was simple and precise. Rafferty would be publicly observed in a moment of difficulty with his left hand, the physician would provide formal testimony, and the petition to the courts would proceed. Someone had told Cornelius about the tremor. She sat with that knowledge for a long time, turning it. The Edinburgh physician was the only other person who knew, the Edinburgh physician and his assistant, and one other person. A woman who had spoken plainly to a stranger in a crowded assembly room, without checking first how many people stood close enough to hear. She was still sitting with that when Rafferty appeared in the library doorway, his coat off and his collar loosened, and stopped when he saw the open drawer. He did not speak. "I found them," she said. "I know I should not have looked. I looked." He crossed to the desk and sat in the opposite chair without closing the drawer. He looked at his hands for a moment, right and left, the uncovered skin of the left one visible in the low evening light. "Did you read them?" he said. "3, she said, "and I need to tell you something, and I ask that you let me finish before you answer." She took a breath. "At the assembly rooms, when I spoke to you, I said what I said without checking who stood nearby. It is possible I was overheard. It is possible I am the reason Cornelius knows." He was very still. "Cornelius learned of the tremor through other means," he said. "My Edinburgh physician's assistant kept his own records. Cornelius paid him for a copy." He paused. "I confirmed this last week." She let out a slow breath. "I made certain of it," he continued after the assembly. "I went back and established who had stood close enough to hear you. No one had. There was a couple immediately behind us conducting their own argument with great intensity. I was not careless, Miss Merriweather. I chose to speak to you knowing the risk." She looked at him. "You knew I was a physician's daughter." "I knew you saw something real," he said. "I had not spoken to anyone in 3 years about what I carry. Not in that way." He looked at the window. It was a relief of sorts, even if I did not intend it. The evening had come fully in now, and the room was growing dim around them. She could see only his outline and the pale, still surface of his hands against the chair. "Haverbrook House," she said. "When is the gathering?" "The 14th, he said. 12 days. "Then we have 12 days," she said, "to find a way to make this fail." He looked at her in the near dark for a long moment. She could not read his expression. She did not need to. She could hear, in the quality of the silence, something changing. "We," he said. "You asked me to stay a fortnight," she said. "I have 4 days remaining. I intend to use them." Haverbrook House was 12 miles from Bath, and the
In a room of candlelight and shadow, you were standing like a storm unspoken. Every glance a little piece of danger, every word a fragile thing unbroken. There was something in the way you vanished, something heavy underneath the grace. And I saw the truth you tried to hide there, in the quiet lines upon your face. I could hear the fear beneath your breathing, like a secret calling out for air. And I knew before I touched the surface that the truth was waiting there. When the silence speaks, I listen. When the walls come down, I stay. Love is not a perfect promise. It is choosing not to walk away. Through the dark, through the doubt, through the night, I will be the light you never knew you needed. When the silence speaks, I listen. And I love you in the spaces in between it. There were letters hidden in the cold hands. There were footsteps chasing after fate. There was loss and fear and careful distance, and a heart that learned to hope too late. Then a hand reached out without a warning, and a heart began to trust the fall. What was broken did not need perfection, only someone there to hear it all. I could feel the weight you never named in the tremble of the fading dust, and the world could call it weakness, but I called it trust. When the silence speaks, I listen. When the walls come down, I stay. Love is not a perfect promise. It is choosing not to walk away. Through the dark, through the doubt, through the night, I will be the light you never knew you needed. When the silence speaks, I listen. And I love you in the spaces in between it. Let the world keep its judgment and its shadows. Let the echoes try to pull us apart. I have learned the shape of your confession, and I carry it inside my heart. No disguise, no fear, no mercy, only truth in the trembling air. And I will stand beside you softly, like I was always meant When the walls come down, I stay. Love is not a perfect promise. It is choosing not to walk away. Through the dark, through the doubt, through the night, I will be the light you never knew you needed. When the silence speaks, I listen. And I love you in the spaces in between it. In the hush beneath the chandeliers, in the garden after rain. What was once a hidden sorrow now becomes a kind